Thank you for coming all here. As the room keeps filling in, I would like to start with the introduction of our speaker today, which is Paula de la O. She's a FAO officer. She's an advisor on the strategic program on rural poverty reduction. Greetings from Texcoco, Estado de Mexico. So as I was saying, Paula is here to give us a presentation on FAO strategy on rural poverty reduction. FAO has 5 main strategic objectives, and rural poverty reduction being one of them. They contribute directly to the Sustainable Development Goals 1 and 2, which is zero hunger and no poverty. The organization is reframing somehow, revisiting the strategy in an exercise somewhat similar to what CIMMYT might be doing presently. So I think it's really interesting to reflect on what are the challenges and what is the ways to effectively conduct activities that go from science to impact in the beneficiary countries. And actually one of the main questions to address is how do we reach the poorest of the poor, and how do we stimulate an impact that remains after the project's end. So that will be interesting reflections that we can share with Paula. She's also going to do some reference to the theory of change that she's working on with the strategic team on rural poverty reduction, and similarly, CIMMYT is working also on the theories of change. So I think it is pretty appropriate, and I think we are very lucky to have her here because she's based in Rome, although she's Mexican, and that's also an extra benefit of having her here. So, Paula, please come. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Victor, and thank you, everyone, for inviting me to give this very short presentation, I hope. It's my first time in CIMMYT, so it's very exciting, even though I'm Mexican. So thank you. And I think this morning I had the opportunity to talk to your Director General, and it seems that we're organizations like CIMMYT and FAO, which have this very traditional way of thinking about our role in agriculture, is starting to shift. I think is the outcomes of trying to align all the international organizations, trying to align better to the global goals that we have now and the big challenges that we're facing today. So my presentation is about this, basically. It says linking research and investment in agriculture because you being a research organization, I thought that I would like to also mention part of the work that we're doing in this area, but of course it's broader than that. So let's start. And I would like to start with some of the challenges that we are looking at. And as you know, in the last 2 or 3 decades, we've seen great progress in reducing hunger and poverty, and improving food security and nutrition, which are, of course, the goal of FAO. And we've also seen great gains in productivity and technologies. I think it's easier for me to read here. Technologies that have contributed to more efficient resource use and better food safety. Nevertheless, we continue to face great challenges today in terms of about 760 million people still living in extreme poverty, about the same, a little higher, millions still suffer from hunger, and even higher, 2 billion people still with micronutrient deficiencies or other forms of overnourishment. Within this, there's also the concern that in the last 35 years, the poorest of the poor, so those who are really at the bottom, have not seen their lives improve or their incomes improved, which already tells us that we are leaving an important part of the population behind. In addition to this, there's also climate change, increased competition for natural resources that are contributing to natural resource degradation and scarcity, natural disasters along with extreme weather events also increasing the number and intensity expected to deepen the global need for humanitarian assistance. Finally, mass migration and youth unemployment are also two areas of concern of FAO, given that this may become new threats to food security and potentially also social and political instability. So this is just, apologies if you can't see very well, but this is just a graph to show you that in least developed countries, the extreme poverty headcount has not reduced at the same pace, obviously, of other lower, middle, and upper income countries. So you see a great gap between those countries that are at a higher level of development than those that are at the bottom of development, and this is also a concern. There has also been some changes in the trends of poverty from the 90s. Before, extreme poverty used to be concentrated in East Asia. Now it's concentrated mostly in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. You could see that Sub-Saharan Africa hosts the largest number of extreme poor in the world, and also the highest percentage of extreme poor in the world. This is how extreme poverty used to look like during the 90s. I don't know if you're familiar with this very nice, let's call it a picture developed by the World Bank, but basically with this it's very easy to see that in the 90s China had the majority of extreme poor in the world, almost 750 million, which is basically the number of extreme poor that we have today. And also India and other countries in East Asia, whereas now you can see this has been the enormous change actually in the world in terms of reducing poverty. It was basically driven by China and other Asian countries as well. And as you can see, the number of extreme poor in Sub-Saharan Africa have increased quite significantly. Another change, important change, is that most of the extreme poor now live in lower middle income countries. And of course, this has also to do with the fact that many of the least developed countries moved to a middle income status. But this also means that in countries like Mexico, for example, there's higher inequality. So we're seeing less inequality between countries, but major inequalities within countries. Here you probably can see very well, and I apologize, but you could see that also there's greater pace in reducing extreme poverty, or there has been greater pace in reducing extreme poverty than in reducing hunger. And hunger is more evenly distributed across regions as well, and this is mainly, again, concentrated in, well, it's not concentrated, but the number of the hungry by region have moved from East Asia to South Asia. And again, South Asia is the region that hosts the largest percentage of hungry by region. And this is also the fact that it's more evenly distributed across regions is because, well, beyond poverty, the determinants of hunger is more complex. It has to do, as you know, with sanitation, quality of diets, hygiene, and also inabilities of populations for managing risks. Okay, so that is what has changed recently in the last decades. What has not changed is the characteristics of the extreme poor and the hungry. They continue to be predominantly rural, although this may change in some regions very soon, like in Latin America, as the rates of urbanization continue to accelerate. Most depend, at least partly, on agriculture, fishing, or forestry for their livelihoods. And as you all know, they have less access to productive resources, notably land, water, technologies, basic services such as health, education, social protection, basic infrastructure, roads, water, electricity, and also other income-generating opportunities outside the farm. They're also more likely to be malnourished in all forms. These households have higher dependency ratios, have difficulty managing risks. They're more vulnerable to climate-related shocks. They tend to live in remote areas. Therefore, they tend to be more isolated. They're often young, female, and indigenous, and are also more likely to suffer from conflict and live in fragile states, which is something that we've been seeing accelerating in the last years. So, well, Victor mentioned in the introduction that FAO has been reflecting on these issues, and basically our theory of change for reducing rural poverty is very simple. This is basically it, and this is where FAO is trying to concentrate its efforts and listing our program for rural poverty reduction. First of all is fostering inclusive structural transformation and growth. So making sure that also the poorest of the poor and the poor in general participate and benefit from economic growth. And what does that mean? Well, it means that we need to address the structural constraints of poor farmers in terms of access to land, credit markets, technologies, and services. We also need to start thinking about farmers as people that engage in other sectors. So the creation of off-farm employment for these farmers is very important. So FAO is trying to link more with a value chain food systems perspective as well, not just from the agricultural production point of view. Access to basic risk management and social protection systems in the rural sector. Of course, we also recognize, although we don't necessarily work on these issues, which is the availability of, well, the access to good infrastructure, energy, transport, water, sanitation, and also building human capital, health, and education. As I said, we don't focus on these areas, but we do partner with other UN agencies and other actors because we recognize that these have also incidence in what we do. Another area that is quite new to FAO is this part of a strengthening governance. So we believe that it's very important to increase the capacities of local governments and institutions and organizations, farmers' organizations, as well as governance in the management of resources. And finally, we also focus on empowering the poor through increasing their participation and voice in political processes, as well as increasing their knowledge and helping protect their rights. We also think that SDGs 1 or 2 are interdependent. So poverty is a determinant of hunger and malnutrition in terms of access and availability. I mentioned that the poor tend to live in remote areas. As we move into eradicating extreme poverty, the people that tend to be left behind are those that live in very remote areas. Utilization, because food choice is linked to education, food safety is linked to infrastructure. So you could see that also these aspects of poverty have an incidence in malnourishment and hunger. Stability, I mentioned as well, the relevance of climate-related shocks and conflict. And on the other hand, malnutrition is also a determinant of poverty. The relevance of the first 1,000 days of a person can have greater implications in their ability to access, good incomes, and it also reduces productivity in agriculture. So this is all to say that for FAO, we recognize that the role of agriculture and food systems is very relevant for reducing poverty and hunger and ensuring food security and nutrition. And this is where in this linkage between SDGs 1 and 2, FAO is finding its key role. Agriculture and food systems are key. There's numerous cross-country studies and country experiences that highlight the larger impact of agricultural growth and poverty reduction, particularly for the poorest and the most hungry. Some studies indicate that this sector has, it's about 3 times more powerful for bringing people out of poverty than other sectors, especially when the growth comes from staple goods than for export crops. This is a graph showing, for example, how agriculture accounted for the bulk of poverty reduction in Ethiopia in the last 15 years. Also in China, China's reform of the sector had probably the greatest role to play in reducing poverty in that country. And also agriculture is very relevant for the poorest because it also functions as a safety net for food security. Agriculture also enables rural transformation, so it enables rural households to move out of agriculture eventually. Nevertheless, being agriculture a very relevant sector for poverty reduction, agricultural investment is on the rise, but not sufficiently and mostly concentrated in high-income countries. Low and middle-income countries invest much less relative to the size of agricultural sector. And research and development investment is minimal in poor countries, as you could see in this graph. Is the lowest in the low-income countries where agriculture plays a great role. Unfortunately, the pledges, political pledges, such as in L'Aquila and Pittsburgh, have been subsided in recent years. Countries have not been able to invest as much as they committed in the sector, and on top of it, we know very little about how much these investments and research in agriculture and rural development are effectively reaching the poorest, the poor and the poorest. So this is an area that I'd like to focus for the last part of my presentation, and is basically this area of work that we are trying to scale up in our program, which is about enhancing the effectiveness of research for informing policy and investments at country level for achieving SDGs 1 and 2. So as you see, agriculture is a very broad sector, and not all investments are going to contribute to SDGs 1 and 2. There are limited resources, and if truly our goals are SDGs 1 and 2, we need to be more strategic in how we invest those resources. Therefore, we also need to target activities of the rural poor and extreme poor to improve their livelihoods. Investments, there are certain investment conditions that need to be put in place in order for investments in agriculture to have higher impacts in poverty reduction. One of the most important ones is that land or other natural resources need to be more equally distributed. This is one of the areas where FAO is also contributing to the world. I don't know how many of you have heard of the voluntary guidelines for responsible tenure of land, forest, and fisheries. Another one is that the research that we do must also focus on solving the problems of the poor, which is often not the case. And this, of course, this includes the poor farmers, fisheries, and foresters. But new technologies must be scale neutral and profitable to all farm sizes as well. Focus on efficient input, credit, and product markets. The rural labor force should also be able to migrate so that they can benefit from other income opportunities created in the agricultural sector, but also in the non-agricultural sector. And policies should not discriminate against small-scale producers. Now, the great challenge that we face, also FAO, is in how we're going to reach the poorest, because they tend to have very limited resources, and most of the time we don't recognize their potential in the sector because of those very limited resources that they have. And this is where we've seen a great opportunity in partnering with the social protection and other poverty reduction programs. And this is because this is how agricultural investments and agricultural wealth, let's say, is going to be able to better target the poorest. Okay, sorry for that. So you may know that an important share of investments in agriculture goes to irrigation and transfer of technologies, including modern inputs such as inorganic fertilizers, pesticides, improved seeds. But what happens is that these are not always accompanied with investments in extension and rural advisory services or in strengthening farmers' organizations to ensure that these inputs are used properly. Recent studies in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, have found that fertilizers and agrochemical use is more widespread in the continent than was thought, but it's often underutilized, and actually it has detrimental impacts on poor farmers' health. So extension and rural advisory services could better develop and provide this role, no? As well as providing more adequate solutions to very context-specific problems. On the other hand, experience of countries suggests that both social and economic investments are equally important because productivity and growth is not enough. So again, as I was mentioning earlier, it is important that not only agricultural investments are made, but also that it's recognized that basic health, nutrition, education, and services are also needed by farmers in order, and that has implications also for agricultural productivity. And that intra-household dynamics also matter. Recent studies, again in sub-Saharan Africa, have found that women's plots are less productive than males' plots. Yes, in part because of their lower access to resources, but also because they don't benefit from male labor in their plots. And as well as they have high responsibilities in the household, and the lack of child care solutions does not enable them to spend more time in their plots. Investments for employment generation in agriculture is also an area where we focus, because it's typical to see in the studies of structural transformation that lower productivity in agriculture, that there tends to be lower productivity in the agricultural sector. Nevertheless, when you take into account the time dedicated to the sector, you see that it's mostly derived from underemployment in the sector. So there's a need to create off-season employment, particularly when agricultural conditions, lack of good temperature and resource availability all year round. So again, we need to be innovative in the sense of ensuring that the agricultural sector can also employ full year our farmers. The role of migration is very important. We are in the context where migration is seen as a threat and not as part of structural transformation and growth. And then there we need to enhance the policies that enable migration opportunities to reach better jobs in agriculture and in other sectors. Land tenure rights regularization is also very relevant, because what happens is that we lack of more secure and dynamic land markets. And this is particularly harmful for the youth, who tend to have lower access to these resources, and therefore they can't stay in the agricultural sector. So we need to find better solutions for this, and because this enhances income diversification and also transition as well. Enhancing the conditions for better harvesting, handling, and storage facilities, again with a focus on food systems, can also generate income opportunities in rural areas. And finally, technologies can also lower employment opportunities for the poor, and this is something that is often lacking in research. We don't look at the impact of technologies on decreasing employment opportunities and also poverty. So this is also an area where we're very interested in. This is my final slide, and I'd like to open for discussion after. But really what we're trying to do, one of the initiatives that we have is to trying to coordinate and better coordinate and link data and research efforts at policy level, at country level with policy and investment, as well as at global levels. And for this, we've partnered with FAO, with IFAD. FAO has partnered with IFAD, the World Bank, and also the CGIAR ISPC, as well as other institutions for precisely doing this, making research more relevant for countries' needs. Because again, what happens is that we as FAO sometimes realize that our partners are undertaking similar research on one hand, so we've not been very effective in how we use, again, scarce resources. And on the other hand, often these research agendas are driven by global interests, but not driven by country-specific needs or even poor farmers. So this is something that I think needs to change in order for us to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals 1 and 2. So for that, we've already engaged in mapping an exercise for identifying major gaps in research, knowledge in agriculture and rural development. And we also want to pilot a coordinated level, again, linking of data collection, research policy and investment into sub-Saharan African countries that we are identifying at the moment. We also had our first annual expert consultation last year in December, and we expect to have this to be continued. We hope to have CIMIT in the next one. And finally, we also want to mobilize resources for this kind of effort, establishing a joint research facility. So this is really my last slide. And again, I think this shift of thinking at FAO hasn't been easy, but we need to. At least this is our perspective from the poverty reduction, trying to recognize that we cannot continue to do business as usual to reach the poorest or have incidents in poor people's lives. So more dedicated effort and targeting is needed, and better data as well for identifying the people that need the bulk of resources of international organizations like FAO. Thank you very much.
Thank you. No, you can stay. I guess probably some participants may have some questions, so I would like to open the floor. Is anyone? You can raise your hands. Kevin.
Well, let me take some.
Hi, maybe you could just share with us some of the initial findings from those mapping exercises that you said are being done, have been and are being done at country level to identify those agricultural research interventions that could be most effective in addressing poverty.
Oh, I have to reply now? Or I can take three or whatever is easier.
I actually have a couple of questions. One would be about how do you see the role of agriculture in kind of correcting or addressing those economic differences that seem to exacerbate in the countries, especially like in middle-income countries? What would be the role of agriculture? And similarly, if you would have some best cases or some experiences that you would like to share with us on countries that have efficiently targeted this problem of inefficiencies through agricultural development programs or strategies nationwide.
Okay, so in terms of the mapping exercise, well, we have a report from the annual consultation that I think it's easier if I share it with you because it's vast, no? But maybe the areas where research is lacking still, at least from to the level that can better inform policies, is individual level data about what people do for a living in agriculture and in other sectors. So we tend to only look at whether people participate or not in a sector, but we don't know how much time they spend on it and what other activities they engage in, and we don't know who in the family is doing what as well. So it's still very aggregated at household level. And what happens is that having this kind of data does not enable us to have better recommendations for policies. Because yes, we can target rural households, we can target farmers groups, but we cannot reach to the level that sometimes is needed, such as, you know, how to combine agricultural interventions with social and poverty reduction interventions. And for making this link, we need that level of specificities, let's say. Another area that is lacking, again, is having, and I was talking about it to Carolina, is that we don't have farmer registries. So Brazil, for example, has done a great work in knowing who is actually engaging in agriculture, and having farmers registries could enable better targeting of our agricultural interventions, but not only, because it can be also linked to other databases from other ministries. No? So if we were able to have a unified registry of the poor or farmers and being able to combine that, again, it will be easier for us to implement the programs that we're trying to take forward. No? Those are the two things that I can think. Unfortunately, I'm not a scientist for you. So there's many gaps in science as well, no, on the kind of technologies that could lead to poverty reduction that could be more accessible for the poor. I think this is something that is still lacking. I think good progress has been made in looking at sustainable mechanization and mechanization that is accessible for the poorest. But I think this needs to be scaled up, and for being scaled up, we need to understand what the impacts are. No? So another big gap is from all the research that places like CIMIT do we know the impact on increasing incomes, in reducing poverty, in increasing rural transformations? Do we know the impacts of retaining the youth in the sector? These are the kind of things that we don't know. A lot of the research goes on the impact on adoption of new technologies, and already there it's a very complex exercise, but we know much less on how much that has an impact on nutrition, on reducing poverty. So more impact evaluation is needed in this respect. Now, I think for your question, Victor, on the role of agriculture, what is the role of agriculture to decrease inequalities? Is that, could I? Well, I mean, it's true that, as I said, agriculture tends to be less productive when you look at different productivity measures. But at the same time, it is true that, as I was telling in presentation, we tend to measure this productivity just by looking at participation. So. Oftentimes what happens, because of the nature of agricultural employment, is that people do not get access to employment all year round. And this is why I think there's still a great role for FAO and other partners to increase, to reform the sector so that it can provide full year. In some, it won't be possible in all contexts, but to provide full employment when it's available, and also better link it to food systems. So all what is linked to processing, storage, providing services around agriculture. Those are the things those are the areas that are often neglected in the sector. Again, it's our productivist mindset, and we don't think on all these linkages. And actually, when you look at how agricultural productivity, but productivity in the sector is measured, oftentimes all the work linked to agriculture within the food system is not taken into account. So I think if we take into account that agriculture can boost other forms of employment, I think it could provide a great opportunity still within the sector to increase these inequalities and increase incomes of people. Experiences from other countries targeting these inefficiencies. I think a lot of countries are trying to do this. Some countries more seriously than others, and with very different approaches. Clearly the case of China, where they reformed the sector when they moved from a collectivist to an individual rights, it's called the household responsibility system, where they had access to their own plots of land and had more increased decision making on what they could produce and how that production could be sold, and how they redistributed the land more equitably across farmers. That had a great impact. But of course, we cannot replicate that in other countries. No, China is a very particular case, and also benefited from opening the economy at that time. No? So, but there are many ways. I think one of the main things I was saying in my presentation is to decrease these inequalities in access of natural resources. No, we cannot expect that growth in the sector can benefit everybody the same way if some have very small plots of land, whereas others have hundreds of hectares. No, I think that's one of the most contentious issues that we have to deal with, and increasing the governance of these natural resources. That if we don't take action now, it will just continue to increase, no? Because of the way natural resources are becoming scarcer, and in climate change, making the situation more difficult. No, so water is the next, or it is already a battle that governance of water is going to be also, or it is already an important aspect that we will need to deal from a policy level. No? What else? I think there's a wave, especially in Latin America, of trying to link cash interventions like the conditional cash transfers with productive inclusion. I think this is another way in which governments are trying to target better agricultural interventions to the poor and the poorest. I think the problem there is trying to help, or trying to make the Ministry of Agriculture talk to the social welfare ministries. The agricultural ministry and the social welfare ministries are always, well, not always, but oftentimes competing, like many other ministries in several countries. We actually have a program in sub-Saharan Africa dealing exactly with this, trying to bring the Ministry of Agriculture and the social welfare ministries talk and put together programs. Because, as I was mentioning, most of the poor are located in rural areas and depend on agriculture, so it's not, there can be this disconnect, no? So finally, another new, let's say, way of doing things is looking at territorial development models. Again, trying to go beyond production, trying to better organize the different players or stakeholders at territorial level based on the potential of one geographic area with the values of that geographic area in terms of what can be produced there, how it can be marketed, how to link it to markets, how to bring the different environmental aspects, social aspects, etc., which is a lot of coordination efforts, but which at the end also have, as I was saying, no, if we only focus on one sector, at the end it won't work, because all sectors have a role to play in reducing poverty. So you have to bring all these sectors together and work together for rural development, basically.
Thank you for the presentation. You gave a long list of problems and issues, and many of them have been around for many years, let's say. It also shows basically the complexity of dealing with poverty and hunger. And my question is actually, okay, if Superman doesn't exist who can tackle all these problems, how do you see the role of FAO? And I'm also thinking about CIMMYT, also always struggling, okay, where do we see our role in tackling all these issues, from gender issues, from policy level issues, from accessibility? Where do you see, let's say, the competitive advantage of FAO as a partner in crime to solve this, and how do you see the relation to CIMMYT?
Kind of similar. You mentioned the cases of China and Ethiopia about bringing people out of rural poverty, and one of the big impacts that's been there has been government interventions. So kind of following on, kind of similar, in terms of the countries that have been successful, the ones that have done it because they've had the government intervention, so then how do FAO and CIMMYT play that role if it's the government who have really been the ones having the success?
Perhaps making a whole case about that. One of the points that you told about China, and it's something that I'm really interested on, it's about land access, no? So in that sense, you told us the story that in China land was very important. So how can FAO and CIMMYT can contribute in a very controversial point as land distribution at a country level? It's something that, for instance, and let me give you a concrete example. In Buena Milpa, the project that we are working in Guatemala, the farmers, they have a lot of problems because they have a quarter of hectare for producing. And the big farmers are in the lowlands producing sugarcane. There has not been land reform. As we as CIMMYT should promote land reform in Guatemala?
Okay. Oh, there's another one.
Can we take another one?
You mentioned the low productivity of female plots, and one of the main reasons for that is that women are overburdened with household activities, and that one of the solutions for that is to develop better childcare facilities in the rural areas. So can you tell if FAO is cooperating with the governments on that issue, and if there are any projects on that, and if yes, is there any progress? Thank you.
Just, you mentioned the importance of taking in consideration the whole value chain, not only productivity in agriculture. How do you think institutions like FAO or the CGR centers should work better with the private sector to close the circle from the field to the consumers?
Okay, wow. Okay, well, in relation to the comparative advantage of FAO and also, well, first, the comparative advantage of FAO is certainly our link to the government, no? That we work with governments at the end. We have this role of conveners, no? Convening the government, with other actors, including the CGIAR centers, no? I think that's our comparative advantage. I was mentioning that this link between social protection and the agricultural sector, and is actually, you know, UN agencies like UNICEF, who has a long track on working on social protection, who's actually saying we need FAO to bring this sector closer to the poor, no? Because there's an enormous gap there that has not been addressed by anyone. If you think, like, this is not only, I think that I would say most of the ministries of agriculture are not catering for smallholders, no, or small-scale producers. For us, I think this will be our comparative advantage, to make the case that the poor also have productive potential. And they're the majority at the end of the day. They're the majority of the farmers in the world, and most of the food is produced by small producers. So there's a whole sector that has been neglected by the way we do agriculture, and this would be our comparative advantage. And the role of CIMMYT is, I think, similar, because research must be better catered for these farmers, where public resources or public investment is very low, and how CIMMYT can partner with, you know, FAO and other actors on bringing your findings of research so that this could be scaled up at national level. Because we're not going to move any indicator if we continue to do pilots here and there, or projects that end after 5 years and nothing happens. I think it's good to do research already with the objective in mind that this can be adopted by the government and implemented by the government in long term, and also that government is able to recognize its values so that it survives changes in government. So I think that's where we have a role, how to we better communicate what we already know, and how we make governments implement this in the long term and in a more sustainable way. And finally, another comparative advantage that we have as international organizations is having this neutral role. We are, in a way, outsiders, and we can come and evaluate and bring recommendations and bring different actors to lead discussions around issues that countries see value, no? Where countries see value. So I think this is basically the role, or should be the role, of international organizations, not just doing things in a vacuum. I'm not an expert in China, but recently, moving to the second question, recently I've had the chance to go to China quite a bit, because the Chinese are very interested in communicating their experience of poverty reduction to the world. In Ethiopia also, we've done a lot of work, and it's true that when you go to other countries and then you look at China, no, or countries like Ethiopia, Rwanda, no, which are have a very characteristic way of doing things with strong institutions, you realize that, after all, governments have a role, institutions have a role, and nothing is going to happen unless institutions are strong for implementing projects, for designing projects, for ensuring justice, for ensuring social inclusion. Definitely, I think this is what we can learn from China. The Chinese government has says that they will eradicate extreme poverty by 2020. And you go to any ministry, it doesn't matter what kind of ministry is, they all start with the same message. We have to eradicate poverty by 2020. And this is how our ministry is going to achieve that. So everybody is doing what they're supposed to do. And I think this is lacking a lot in other countries. And it's the same in Ethiopia and Rwanda. No? You know that when government says this is what we're going to do, it has to be implemented. And this is where you see impact. No? What else? Land reforms. I think where we have an opportunity is, especially in this region, is the increasing role of civil society. So the more people know about their rights, the more people have incidents in politics, you can stimulate processes that can lead to changes in legislation, changes in policy, no? And of course, Guatemala is famous for its failure, no? After the peace, after the conflict ended, no? When the peace agreement was reached, what lacked there was precisely reverse or address the core of that conflict, was basically the lack of rural development, no, and the inequalities that existed in access to resources. So, although you can see Guatemala as a case that failed, many countries are also learning from that experience. And one recent one is Colombia. So we have, as FAO, we're bringing Guatemalans. I know some Colombians here. Guatemala's coming to Colombia to share their experiences. Bolivians is coming to Colombia, share their experience. Guatemala's coming to Colombia to share their experiences on how not to make this another Guatemala, in the sense that the issue of land is one of the first things that needs to be resolved. And in fact, we're, as FAO, we've have the great privilege of being one of the agencies that is supporting the government on implementing point 1 of the accord on comprehensive rural reform. And part of why they ask FAO to do this is because of all the work we've been doing at local level on issues around governance of land tenure. And a lot of this is from the ground, generating this discussion with all actors. It's the only way. On female plots, well, FAO does not deal necessarily with child care. I said child care solutions because if you don't have in rural areas access to many of the services that you need, of course, child care is going to be like the least thing they're going to prioritize. Nevertheless, there are some agencies that are dealing with that. For example, in the context of public works, in agriculture, which is a way of extending social protection in rural areas, which is intensive work in agriculture. Part of these programs is also providing childcare on sites. But then they realize that the childcare on sites is not very effective in some contexts because women don't trust, of course, leaving their children with people they don't know. So I know that UNICEF is experiment with other kind of solutions in people's communities, so that women can participate in wage employment, in this case public works, while someone in the community is in charge of the children. But it's very complex because you have to provide a minimum infrastructure and also a minimum skills for people to basically care of other people's children. No? But as a feminist, I tend to think that the main problem is redistribution of the roles in the household. So negotiating basically who's going to take of our children, no, in this case, within the household, no, and it cannot all be seen as women's responsibility. It's a responsibility that needs to be shared. But that's off the record, my personal my personal opinion. Finally, how do we bring the private sector? Well, Victor has a better idea on how to do that than me. This is not my area of expertise. But it certainly, you see an increased interest of the private sector to also contribute to the SDGs. And I can think of, again, Colombia, how many people, how many private companies related to the agricultural sector, including livestock, are willing to make linkages with small-scale producers to transfer technologies, to transfer capacity development. Of course, it's a win-win. I think where we haven't worked very well is on the win-win. This is an area that I think we need to better think as UN agencies, is that private sector are not donors. They need to see a clear win-win, and we need to identify those so that they can better engage in development. Okay.
and opening up market is part of that strategy that we are working on. Well, I would say thank you, unless there is a final quick one. Yeah, let's have a final quick question. Yeah.
Hello. You were talking that FAO is going to accompany Colombia in the first paragraph of agriculture. What do you think about CIDRES?
What? Sorry?
CIDRES. That's what the Colombian government is using to take that agriculture step. This is Ley CIDRES.
Ley CIDRES?
With a Z.
I'm sorry, I don't know about that law.
Well,
see if you could explain a little more.
Well, I'm from Colombia.
Okay.
And what they're trying to upgrade agriculture with a law that's called CIDRES. That's part of the treat that they did with the gorillas, right? So one of the things they do is that they're going to accompany private sector from other countries that would go to Colombia and work with small farmers. But there are a lot of people that don't know what's going to happen in the future when that happens. And if FAO is in that, I would like to know what they think.
So in the role of regulation, basically, or monitoring what comes out of this law?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I cannot answer that question, okay. But I can find out.
Thank you.
And let you know.
Fair enough. Well, thank you everyone. It's about time. So I would like to thank again Ana Paula for her time and coming here. As she briefly mentioned before, she had a meeting earlier during the day with Martin, and I think we have identified a few important issues to follow up together and to coordinate action in some of these countries where CIMIT is already working on. So we are looking forward to that progress. And if someone else wants to approach Ana Paula, maybe that could be now could be a good time to do so. But we are ending here the formal session. So thanks again for your presence. Thanks to Ana Paula.
Thank you.
So you're in charge of